The 5-5 pot limit Omaha game with a $10 rock at the Aria. This is the game we want to be playing in. It's big enough to where it'll keep my interest and encourage me to try and perform well, but not so big that we have to worry about how a downswing might affect the bankroll. I've mentioned before that I think it'll probably play somewhat similar in size to a 100 big blind, 10-20 no limit game. So let's try and put in some solid work. And by solid work, I usually don't mean putting a blind raise to $40 on the button. But the game was a little short-handed, and we're trying to create some action. Shout out to Live at the Bike regular Colleen, who's also in the game and got the occasional $40 blind raise going.
You've got to root for Colleen against Wayne with the 8 deuce. Come on. There it is. Oh, my God.
This raise gets called in 2 spots, and we go 3 ways to a board that doesn't improve my hand, and it gets checked down. But I'm here for the spiciness. In this next hand, we look down at Queen, 6-3 double suited and make it $40 to go from the cutoff. We're playing this one 3-handed in position as well, and we find a reasonably favorable flop of Queen 10-9 with 2 hearts. It's top set with a couple straight draws available plus a flush draw. Action checks to me and I bet 65. The big blind calls and the other player gets out of the way. The turn is a brick, and when the big blind checks, I don't want to slow it down. We can get value from worse sets, pair plus straight draws, and flush draws. I bet 200. My opponent calls again. River is a beautiful looking 5, giving us the virtual nuts here. We'd love to see a lead, but my opponent checks it again. Looks like it's up to us to try and derive some more value, so I bet 475. Doesn't look like there's any value to be had though, as my opponent lets it go.
Thank you.
In this hand, we open Ace, Queen, 10, Deuce with nut diamonds, again for $40, which is the max raise when the rock is not in the blinds. We see 3 callers. 4 ways to a flop of Ace, 9, Deuce, Rainbow, giving us top and bottom pairs. It's an adjustment that we have to make coming from a no-limit background where any flopped 2 pair is usually going to be amazing, but in PLO, we have to tread carefully when it isn't top 2 pair. The player who's first to act leads into the field for $100. It's kind of odd since ace-high boards favor the pre-flop raisers so much, since the pre-flop callers are very, very frequently going to be 3-betting pocket aces. So you'd expect the pre-flop callers to always check to the raiser, but this is live PLO and anything goes. Our hand feels a little too good to just fold, so I toss in the 100, and we go heads up to the 8 of clubs on the turn. And again, the player in the blinds leads out for a hefty bet. We're just done with it now, as there was no draw on the flop, which exudes a fair amount of strength for that player to lead into 3 players. And there's now a flush draw on the turn that we don't have. Take it down, buddy, and just imagine the world of pain we'd be bringing if we had 3 aces instead of just 2. Immediately after that hand, we get dealt a playable double suited hand. The 3 isn't great, as its rank doesn't interact with the rest of the hand, but I'm making a vlog here, and nobody came to YouTube to watch me fold. At least not pre-flop. We're folding post-flop, as it's a total whiff for us. The very next hand dealt after that is an example of what we have to battle to control when playing these live PLO games. There's going to be so many hands that look pretty and you're going to want to play them, and this hand is reasonably connected but has a couple of things working against it. Anytime you have more than 2 cards of the same suit, you're blocking your own flush draw outs. And while Jack 7 can make a straight, it's as gapped as you can be. I'm feeling a little bit tilty from the last few hands. I get in the mix with this one too. And I feel a little bit lucky to flop top 2 in a spot where nobody else puts up much of a fight. After the flop checks through, I fire 225 into my 3 opponents, who all make the fold. And we get a little bit of tilt relief here without sustaining any major damage this time. Alright, a few hands later, after giving myself a proper talking to, we have the rock in front of us and we see a raise to $45 before looking down at King, Jack, 10-9 with a couple of hearts. Much better. I make the call, as does a limper. 3 ways to King, Jack, 8 with 2 spades. We find top 2 this time, plus a straight draw. The original raiser bets $90, and I decided to raise it up here to charge some draws. And looking back, I'm not exactly sure how to feel about this, as it might be a little high on the variance. We aren't super far ahead of a hand that has a combo draw that includes spades, but $350 it is. The other player folds, and the initial raiser calls. The turn is a brick, and my opponent checks. There's no going back now. I bet $800. My opponent thinks for about 4.5 seconds before making the call. It's extremely unlikely that we don't have the best hand at the moment, with the board being so draw heavy and only about $500 behind going into the river, but we're hoping for it to be a clean one. An offsuit queen falls, giving us a king high straight, but it leaves ace 10 as a possible hand that we could lose to. But when my opponent checks, and as mentioned, there's only another $500 behind, it seems too unlikely that my opponent wouldn't bet it himself if that were the case. Feeling like we're still good a lot of the time, I'm going to jam it in and go for the last $500 worth of value.
All in. All in.
This time my opponent takes a bit longer and wants a count. He doesn't seem thrilled, but he also doesn't want to throw it away getting these kinds of odds. Eventually, he does make the call, which is great news since we can't lose after he tanks, barring a slow roll. It's not a slow roll. We're scooping in a big one.
$5 back.
In this next hand, we open the King Jack 10-7 with a couple of spades to $45 and see one caller before the button puts in a 3-bet to $135. Our hand could be a little more nutted, but that's less than a pot-sized 3-bet. So I make the call, as does the player in the middle. 3 ways to a flop, and it turns out we're nutted after all. I check it, and the hijack bets into the razor for $300. The button folds, and it's straightforward here as the bettor only has another $350 or so behind. We have an obvious raise, and we're going to see a turn and river one time. The turn is a total brick, but the 8 of hearts on the river is not a brick. It completes the front door flush, and that's some bad news. My opponent shows us the ace jack 10-4 with ace high hearts for Broadway plus the flush redraw. Once we see the flop, we're guaranteed to double him up, and we have to give back a portion of our profits on the night before racking it up. Into the game for 2K, out of the game for $3,126 for a result of plus $1,126. PLO is a swingy game, but if we're going to be playing poker in Vegas, I'm happy to accept those swings, and I'll be putting in some more hours in this 5-5-10 game.